Welcome to this webinar on intersectionality, rising to the challenge to be yourself at work. And we organized this webinar in recognition of Lesbian Visibility Week, which is happening this week. And we do it together with Catalyst and Workplace Pride. We are co-organizing this on this important and very, very timely and actual subject of intersectionality. And we have an all-female cast today, supported by an all-male cast. So we're very, very proud of that. In this webinar, we will explore the many different ways in which people identify themselves and their impacts specifically on the workplace. This includes gender and sexual orientation perspectives, but it also examines issues surrounding intersectionality, such as, do you bring all your identities with you to work? And if you feel privileged, which I do in my case, can you use these privileges to open doors for others who are not so fortunate? We will learn from our panel, part of here in the studio, and one guest dialing in from South Africa. We will learn about how they have experienced intersexuality, and specifically when it is related to work, the impact it has had on the careers, and what identity really stands out for you. We also will hear how they deal with and even initiate sometimes the uncomfortable conversations which we need to have to bring this subject a step further. Having said that, whenever during this webinar you feel uncomfortable, lean into that feeling, sit with it, and notice what it does with you. Don't get caught up with the terminology of intersectionality and everything which we has to deal with it. Concentrate on the lived experience. We are really here to together take it a step further, and we need you to feel supported. We want you to feel supported. My name is Bianca Nijhof. I'm the co-chair of Workplace Pride Foundation, and I'm also in my daily life working as a managing director for the Netherlands Sports Partnership. I'm very happy to introduce my panel here and my co-moderator actually in this panel. I should not forget about that. Caroline Picard from Catalyst. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Welcome to everybody here. Welcome to everybody in the studio. It is a real pleasure to be sitting here together at the table with Workplace Pride today. We've been trying to do this for a long time, and I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of Catalyst today to talk about this really, really important subject. I have been working in the last 10 or so years here for Catalyst in the Benelux region, and work together with my EMEA team who are based out of Zurich. I was going to be joined by my colleague Anna Sullivan today, who's part of the Zurich team, but unfortunately she's ill. So I'm stepping into her shoes and my shoes today. So hoping to represent both of our kind of points of view on this topic and joining the conversation in that way.
Wonderful. Good to have you here and good to do this together with Catalyst, actually. We also have Yuli Kim here with us in the studio. Welcome, Yuli.
Thank you, Bianca. Hi, everyone. My name is Yuli Kim, and I'm a Learning and Development Program Manager here at Workplace Pride, Amsterdam. And as I developed the Learning and Development Program, I realized it's impossible. It's intersectionality is impossible to ignore in our program. Yeah. So we talk about extensively on LGBTIQ plus inclusion in the workplace, but we have to talk about gender, we have to talk about race, and we have to talk about all the other characteristics, personal characteristics that every individual is unique. And I'm really excited about this topic, and thank you for having me here today.
Wonderful. And let's go to our last panelist, certainly not the least. We're very proud to have you here with us online. Sebentil Gambule, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you very much, Bianca. And it's good to be with you all, Caroline, Yuli as well. Thank you for the invitation. I am coming to you from a sunny but a chilly Johannesburg. My name, as you already mentioned, Bianca Sebentil Ngambule. I am the Executive Officer for Strategic Partnerships at the Other Foundation. The Other Foundation is an African philanthropic trust that does work to advance and promote equality and freedom in Southern Africa, with a particular focus on sexual orientation and gender identity. We gather support to advance the human rights and social inclusion for the LGBTI community in our region. We do this by working as both a fundraiser and a grant maker, and we work in 13 Southern African countries. This topic in particular is of great importance for me as you know a Black African queer woman. The layers when you know thinking about how you show up in the workplace, the kind of contribution you're able to make. There are a number of barriers, the number of challenges, but the more we speak about it, we are indeed able to, I think, to get closer to the heart of the matter, and in fact, become closer as people. In my particular context, as you would know, right, South Africa, even though we live in a post-apartheid time, the effects of that structural racism and structural inequality persists, and we battle and we live through it on a daily basis. I like to say that our prejudice and our racism is of a premium quality here, and we export it as well. And that's why on a daily basis it is a battle, both within just general ordinary life as well as within the workplace as well. As a Black person in this country, I am part of the numeric majority, but very much part of the minority in terms of access to opportunity in the economy. Also being part of a cultural minority in many ways. And I think so at times when people look at our demographics, you sometimes then have, I think, a skewed perspective of what the experience of life is here. Added to that, as a queer person on the continent, we also have premium quality homophobia. And again, that's another battle that we are facing on a daily basis. And so being able to appreciate and understand all of these dynamics at play at any given time is quite critical. But also being an educated woman as well also privileges me in ways that other women aren't. And it's important to also be able to reflect on that as well as an individual. And I do hope that throughout this conversation, we'll be able to speak to how, as an organization, as the Other Foundation, we speak to some of these challenges, but also how I've experienced it as a professional.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you on the webinar. Thank you, Silencio. Maybe just for all of you to know as an audience, please do know there's a chat. Put your questions to us here. And we will first have a conversation now, and I will ask Caroline to start that conversation and introduce the theme of intersexuality a little bit more to you all. Then we have another second part of the conversation for the next 20 minutes. But the last 20 minutes of today's webinar, we will use to have a Q&A with you. So please do put your questions in the Q&A all throughout, and Mike will be monitoring it, and we will be addressing those questions in the last 20 minutes of the webinar. So Caroline, over to you. Intersectionality.
Thank you
What
very
is
much.
it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a term which has been around for a long time. It was kind of first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989 as a sort of legal term for picking out, you know, the difference between how you couldn't kind of identify when someone was being discriminated against. Was it because of their gender? Was it because of their race? Was it because of their sexuality? And actually what we've seen over the years in the work that we do in Catalyst is that people's identities are made up of so many different layers, different experiences, if you like, which cross over, which meet each other and influence each other as well. So you can't really kind of specify that someone's experience is down to just one sort of certain part of their identity, I guess. So intersectionality is when all of those things come together. And in terms of the work that we do at Catalyst, for those of you who don't know, Catalyst works in a very similar way to Workplace Pride, but we do it from a kind of gender point of view. You know, we talk a lot about how we really work to create workplaces which work for women. And one of the reasons that we focus it on that is because that we firmly believe that workplaces which work for women work for everybody. But at the same time, what we've seen kind of historically is that a lot of the work that has been done in the D&I space has not necessarily advantaged everybody. In many cases, it hasn't advantaged all women. Often, it's only advantaged white women. And so I guess where we're really moving to now with the supporters that we work with is an appreciation that it is more complicated than that it is bigger than that, and it requires looking at not just policy, but it also requires really honest conversations and looking at people's lived experiences. And then not really people like me, but taking that out into a wider conversation. And so that's really where we come at this kind of intersectionality conversation. And it's really great that we can do that together with Workplace Pride, because you bring a different perspective in as well. And so that's really why we're doing this work, and why we're encouraging our partners to sort of take on that broader lens, flip the conversation from just diversity, and to really start looking at it from a point of view of inclusion as well.
Perfect. Julie, maybe you can add to that, because you mentioned in your introduction the learning and development program,
Yes.
and intersectionality in there as well.
Yes.
And as Caroline says, it gives a different perspective. And I'll come to you, Sibansil, later on, definitely on the same question.
Yeah, so we have 10 modules in our learning and development program, and module 6 is Together Stronger, Women and LGBTIQ+. And we use this gender equality angle, and it makes so much sense. Yeah. So like you said, a workplace that is good for women is good. It's a good workplace for all.
Yeah.
So the workplace that is inclusive of LGBTIQ+ business professionals, we believe it's like a universal design. It doesn't only benefit the LGBTIQ business professionals, but women as well, and men as well.
Yeah.
And because it's about the elevating LGBTIQ+ and female business professionals, but also in a sense freeing men from the sort of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So if male professionals, if they want to take paternity leave, they should do it. If they want to part-time, go for it. Are they suffering from the fatigue or burnout? Break the stigmatization and come forward. And the culture should also welcome that as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the small portion of the total population, but it works for all. That's what we believe in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sibansil, just bringing you into this conversation, can you add from your perspective, because you bring again a different perspective, different context to it?
Yeah, I guess for me, if I could then just bring in this particular point, and there were just great points raised there, because we work in an advocacy space, right? I mean, that's the work that the other foundation does, but also in a developing country where time, being particular about how you time certain pushes is also quite critical in terms of being able to make impactful gains. We spoke quite a bit, and I think my fellow co-panelists also spoke to the point about all of these different identities, different issues that one may need to tackle at any given point. I think what we are constantly thinking about, and what activists are constantly thinking about, is at any given moment, what is the most strategic thing to do? So once we've all recognized that people show up and they bring all of themselves, from the cultural groups that they belong to, the gender identity that they belong to, right? So once we've all recognized that there are all of these things, how do we then take it a step forward to say this is what we then focus on? I'll give you a quick example in terms of the South African context and the fight for liberation, where the rights for LGBTI people were definitely part of the conversations. However, it was agreed that the timing, we're talking about the early 80s in particular, that's what I'm referencing, the timing didn't quite make sense. So it was almost parked to only then be addressed at a later stage. But for the queer, struggle fighters, or liberation fighters, if you will, it seemed late, because suddenly when that moment came, nobody took it on, and so they had to then fight again for the recognition, and that's when we got to same-sex marriage and all of those other gains. So I think it is important, and I think even for businesses to also think about just when is the right moment, so as to get the most results, if you will. Because if you try and address everything, everyone and their issues all at once, you're essentially boiling the ocean, and it takes that much longer for you to actually start seeing results. However, though, to throw a bit of caution to that, it can be used as an excuse to not get to particular issues because you're saying, oh, no, 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 the time is not right. It's not yet time for us to address this issue within the organization. And it can then delay the sort of impact that you're likely to achieve. But I think it's an important point, particularly for business leaders, for people within corporates, is to understand the time and understand what is then required in this particular moment to shift the needle, if you will, or to start seeing gains for a particular group of people. For ourselves as an organization, we've recognized over the years that LBT women in particular are underfunded, are underrepresented in many ways. And so when the foundation started, you did see a lot of support and a lot of funding going towards gay groups in particular, but we now are being deliberate about making that shift because we recognize that these are people who continue to be underrepresented and underfunded. Would the timing perhaps have made sense a few years ago? I don't think so. I think the timing now makes sense. I make also reference to the litigation victories that we are seeing in our region, for example, whether it's in Botswana or litigation battles in Angola, for example, recognition for same-sex couples, or the abolishment of colonial penal codes, for example. The timing made sense in the last 3-4 years or so. A few years ago, it didn't quite make sense. So I think part of what leaders of organizations, part of what corporates as citizens, right, corporate citizenry, as a concept to speak to, is to also reflect, right, where society is body, where the organization is, and what particular interventions are likely to mean for the group that you are intending to support. To arbitrarily do something because it's June, it's Pride Month, or to arbitrarily focus on women, for example, in March, right, International Women's Day, for example, and not necessarily have a strategy or have a plan as to what it is that you're trying to achieve, I think in the long run is counterproductive. So I'm constantly encouraging folks to, as we recognize these multiple identities housed in one body, and how people show up and what they bring to the workplace and what they don't feel comfortable bringing to the space, do also become cognizant of the need to act, and also be mindful of what particular action means when you support a particular cause. What is it that you're trying to achieve, so that you're not inadvertently doing more harm when the intention was to do good. And so I think that's an important aspect to the bigger conversation of intersectionality.
Thanks. I wanted to ask you, Yuli, a question. So when we talk about intersectionality, how does it impact yourself, and how do you take it for yourself to work? The different identities that you have, and which ones prevail? So what Seven Seals said, it depends on timing, probably, when one kind of way of how you identify prevails. So how's that for you?
So it's probably not to me to joke about it. When people say, like, I'm a middle-aged lesbian Asian mom, people see me as like, oh, wait, hold on a second, what is it? But really, I'm in a kind of privileged position. I had access to higher education, and I live in the Netherlands. Same-sex marriage, any type of marriage is legal and legalized. So when I don't need to compare myself, but my LGBTIQ plus fellow Japanese who live in Japan, for example, they don't have the same access to the legal protection and everything else. So even within the LGBTIQ plus community, for example, it's not just one size fits all. You know what I mean? So gay men usually have more media representation compared to lesbian people or transgender people. I feel like socially people understand more of the gay and lesbians. Okay, it's sort of easy to understand. Okay, men fall in love with men, and women fall in love with women, and then the transgender people within the transgender sort of people. When you transition from male to female, there's more stigmatization because it's more visible compared to female to male people. So as an middle-aged Asian lesbian mom, I still can exercise my privilege to help, but not help, but to support others, to elevate the others within the community. And even outside the community as well. So it's important to focus. So intersectionality is often talked about as a framework to understand how different characteristics impact people when it comes to discrimination, oppression, or stigmatization. So I use this as an opportunity for me to understand my intersectionality. How can I support others? How can I elevate others? And if all of us can do this, and to find your superpower in your intersectionality, I think the workplace will be a much better place across, like, beyond genders or sexual orientation for that matter.
Yeah. Caroline, back to you. What have you seen changing over the years?
I think a much, and I'm not quite sure where it sort of where one thing finishes and the other thing starts. Certainly in the work that we've been doing in our workplaces, we've seen a lot more storytelling. And I'm not sure if storytelling has given people of underrepresented groups the opportunity to finally be listened to, or whether it's given people the opportunity to practice hearing, to practice listening. Because I mean, and I guess that probably comes up in the training programs that you do as well. One of the things that I work on a lot with our supporters is, you know, helping them to kind of develop their skills of inclusion. And actually, one of the most important things there is being curious, suspending judgment, listening. And that's something that people find really hard. I know I found that really hard. That's been a real challenge for me in the last couple of years. So, you know, maybe it's a little bit that whole kind of storytelling thing has become a more popular way of being more authentic at work. But maybe that came out of the whole, you know, movement towards it's time for us to get a little bit real about the humans that we have working for us. You know, I'm not sure which one gets a bit chicken and egg. And that's something that I've really noticed. So, you know, for me particularly, it was the moment to kind of sit down, shut up, and listen to other people's experiences properly, not just hear them, but really listen. And also to kind of help people develop that skill as well.
And how have role models within an organization played a role in that?
I think really, really important. And I think, you know, the more inclusion is practiced as a skill and is recognized in performance, for example, the more people realize that there is a really important place for allies. There is a really important, and not just, you know, okay, so I'm an ally, so I stick a flag on my desk. Or I, you know, make sure that we mark International Women's Day, but that I'm actively encouraging people who don't look like me into leadership roles. Those kind of really intentional actions of giving people a voice, of giving people a stage, you know, not just because they've got big mouth, but that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm very curious, Cynthia, what do you experience there? What about role models or and allies? How do they support you? So,
yeah. So I mean, if I think about, for example, when I still worked in professional services, in McKinsey, for example, we had an affinity group within the organization, which was great. I mean, you know, it was my first job. I'm coming in as a 21-year-old, and you get into this space and you realize that there are all sorts of systems in place. You're being supported, that there's been some thought put behind this, and there's support from the highest levels, from, you know, from partner level, and you're seeing it throughout the organization. And then when you start realizing that, sure, here we are as people who, you know, identify as part of this community. We have our events, it's drinks, it's great. It's now time to go home. I get to jump in my car, and my colleague has to think about the number of taxis that they need to get on. They are watching the agenda because at a certain time it becomes too dark, it's dangerous. They suddenly are facing other other threats outside that I'm not particularly exposed to. So I think I made the comment earlier just about privilege and understanding my own positionality. And I think that's what allies need to do. Allies need to recognize that something as simple, as holding hands with your partner is something that they don't think about, but it's a huge or a big deal for people within the community, for the trans community, who I think for whom the battle continues. Around simple things like using the lavatory, right? So being in organizations where you actually have gender neutral bathrooms is a huge thing. For somebody who doesn't need to think about that, it's just like, it's the loo, folks. Go in there, handle your business, and get out. But for people for whom being able to go in there without having to deal with all of the struggles and the challenges that the trans community have to deal with, it's huge. So it's recognizing again what your own positionality is as an individual, and then figure out how I can be a support, how I can be support for the next person. So when I recognize that I have, I can drive home at whatever time of the day, I had to figure out how I could support people who couldn't do that, right? And it's the same thing with allies. When you recognize that because you happen to be, a heterosexual white straight man, what are a cis straight man? What does that mean? But how do I also use my own positionality to then advance the cause of those who are around me? Again, it's great to say you're an ally, stick a flag on your desk. All of that's wonderful, it's cute, but it's not enough. A lot of the difficulties and the challenges are structural in nature, and so the response also needs to be structural in nature. And when you are in a position where your voice is slightly louder than everybody else's, are you pounding the table for those who perhaps don't feel as though they have the space or they have the language or the capability to be able to do that for themselves? I think allyship is very noble, but it requires sacrifice, and I think in some respects it requires risk as well. But it also requires partnership and collaboration, working with the people that you say you are supporting. Because if you don't, again, you run the risk of causing harm, whereas the intention was a good one. So I've had great experiences with allies, but again, it's I think sometimes allies don't quite go as far as I think they could, particularly given their own positions. Our engagement as the other foundation with businesses is starting to show that quite a bit, where you engaging businesses or corporations, we chat to them about what starting an affinity group looks like. How do you make the environment or your workplace more LGBTI friendly, but we'll also challenge them to say, what more can you actually do, particularly in our context. Corporate citizenry is huge. Corporates are very powerful. The influence that they have to influence governments, to influence lawmakers, decision makers. At what point do you then start doing more of that? Great, you have your affinity group, your workplace is a safe place, or it's becoming a lot safer through conversation, through all sorts of interventions. But challenge yourself. What more can you actually do? And given the might and the power of corporations, I argue that you can do a lot more. And that's where we want to see where I think that's the sort of allyship that I think the movement requires. And to Yuli's point earlier on, as human beings, I think we're all the better for it when everybody around us is at their best. They're able to thrive. They're able to be who they are in their totality.
Thank you, Seventy. Very, very strong, very powerful. And actually, there's a lot in what you're saying. For me, it's about being conscious, or a lot of things we are unconscious of in the way we talk, the way we act. We're very much unconscious how heterosexual and white privileged we are actually acting. So it's becoming much more aware of the little things we do, and those little things become very important. Really.
Yes.
I think you probably have from a learning and development program. I think it's part in there as well, isn't it?
Yes. So using inclusive language.
Yeah.
For example, I catch myself doing this, but hey guys,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I hate it when I do it, but why don't we use hey y'all,
Yeah.
hey folks, just take off the gender, because it really doesn't matter, and
Yeah.
it's just a phrase. And some people say, well, some women don't get offended, it's okay, and both women and men have told me that, but I'm not comfortable with it,
Yeah.
because I don't want to present myself as kind of a person who doesn't
Exclusion,
care
yeah.
or
Yeah.
exclude. And I don't do this intentionally, but I could be doing more uh, dangerous or harmful things
Yeah.
intentionally. So I try to use more inclusive language when I communicate with my children, with my family members, also my colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it requires conscious effort to use this, but I think it's a good start for all of us to be mindful about what kind of language we're intentional, well, unintentionally using.
Yeah, we have addressed trans, we have addressed gay, hetero, but we haven't addressed intersex actually. So with saying, hey guys, you're
Exactly.
actually also not acknowledging
It's
the fact that
non-binary
it's,
as well.
you're saying it's only men and
Yeah.
women, but
And-
there's
Yeah.
more than only identifying yourself as a man
Yeah.
or a woman.
Exactly. And you don't know who you're talking to. Sometimes you have, let's say we have 80, 90 participants in this webinar. And if we just say use kind of the language like, hello guys, hey guys,
Yeah.
that's super exclusive.
Yeah.
And that's a exclusive inclusion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, the fact that both in the US and Europe, almost half of the LGBTIQ plus people won't come out in the workplace because of their fear.
Yeah.
And they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So mind that, assume we're all over the place, we're everywhere.
Yeah.
And also intersex people, sometimes they're visible, not visible, but they just respect that, everyone. And yeah, so inclusive language it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And you said, you triggered me with saying visible, invisible. There's a lot of invisible identities which we don't even see. And I think you touched upon it previously, Caroline. So you're working on gender specifically, but in the collaboration, we take LGBTIQ plus more, but there's much more which you're taking aboard as well. So if we talk about invisible identities, what more does Catalyst take along?
I mean, some of the stuff that we're doing at the moment, if I think of, taking groups through developing their inclusion skills in particular, it's thinking about the stuff that's sort of typically under the surface. So religion, personality, your home life, and on the one hand, and we've all seen this kind of curve through the pandemic. There was a point, March last year, where we all thought it was fantastic that we could see into everybody's living rooms, literally, for the first time. A friend of mine said, this is appalling. I don't want my managers to be able to see into my living room. This is my own private area. And I think so. It's those kind of things as well that we need to keep on remembering to look at. I often encourage people as groups, as teams, to think about how comfortable or uncomfortable they are talking about certain aspects. And what you see is sort of 70 to 80% will be comfortable talking about their sexuality at work, will be comfortable talking about religion at work, will be comfortable talking about their home life at work. And to a certain extent, you also see then the group saying, oh, well, that's really great. 80% of us are comfortable, but there's 20% who aren't. And that's a really important number. So trying to really encourage people to concentrate on the 20%. Okay, what can we do to make the 20% comfortable? How can we push ourselves to create the trusting environments where that's able to happen? That's tough anyway. That's really tough now in the situation that we're in, where we can't see each other.
So corporates, D&I programs, diversity and inclusion programs, could be very powerful in supporting this and addressing these kind of issues as well. And Simonsil, you talked about diversity aspect a lot. You talked about how allies can actually support people who identify along minority identities. So how would the traditional D&I programs, in your opinion, how do they need to change to really have this inclusion be tackled in the society, in the context of the society we live in nowadays?
Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier. Just the word visibility. I think that matters when people have a frame, and Kimberly Crenshaw speaks about this idea of when you're able to see people, you they become top of mind, or at least are part of your consciousness. And so for I think what affinity groups within organizations can do is take up more space where it's safe to do so. You visibility is great, but again, you have to think strategically about it. You have to be cautious about it, because you don't want to suddenly place targets on people's backs without recognizing that. It helps when there's senior leadership that's behind it. So when there is whether it's or if we speak about the C-suite in general, so when there is support from that level, where there's a partner sponsor, when there are events and you have senior leadership attending those events, and participating, not in a gimmicky way, but in a meaningful way. Um, I think all of those acts go a long way in ensuring that you're creating a culture where somebody who perhaps would have never imagined or thought of telling people about their same-sex lover, that they're now able to on Monday morning at the coffee machine talk about going to the theater with their partner, and are not using neutral pronouns to hide who their partner is, but actually speaking quite openly and quite proud about who they are. So the support from leadership we've seen as well from our own experience here is everything. When affinity groups are able to take up space, it's powerful. But also doing the little things like celebrating the key days, bringing in relevant speakers. If you do have the budget, to bring in some known people as well, just um, to make a noise about the issues, or to create a buzz or some excitement, so that you can get into the hard issues as well. You do that. I think there are all sorts of tricks, all sorts of things to do. Supporting a cause, whether it's supporting organizations, we're seeing that a lot here as well, where organizations are calling up to say, hey, please give us a sense of the organizations that you have, um, your partner grantees, and the kind of work that they do. We'd like to support them, and we'd like to support in a meaningful way. So I think taking up space, growing, being strategic and thoughtful about how you're engaging within the organization, and not to make the whatever the events are, on as kind of fringe events, or on the periphery, or that thing again that people can forget about, but something that you're doing continuously. um you know uh, we pick a family day of sorts, if you might have that in your organization, and in some way you bring in the issues. I think all of that is important, because it ensures that the community is not exceptionalized, but is in fact just a key part of the organization, and people become more and more comfortable with that, and hopefully one day it'll feel and become more normal. But affinity groups are very powerful within organizations when the vision is there, when the leadership supports it, and they're very intentional about how they engage the organization and how they show up.
Thanks. I was just thinking while we were talking, it popped up to me that actually today I'm here as a co-chair of Workplace Pride Foundation. As I said, in my regular job, I'm the managing director of the Netherlands Water Partnership. And I told my colleagues I'm moderating this webinar today on intersectionality, and they were like, into what? So I had to explain to them what it was all about. And I was actually wondering, and question to you, Yuli, so aren't we making it overly complex with now adding this word? Um, or is it a good thing we are kind of grouping it and make are we able then to support one another much more? So what's your vision about that?
Well, I hope intersectionality doesn't end as a buzzword, like
Yeah.
equality or
Yeah.
equity or belonging, or all these sort of people. But I think it's good that people are paying attention to this topic.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add to what Sebenzili said about the visibility. So I think representation is also important, and especially media representation. And also, I realized a lot of products for children, books, songs, especially when they're old, the main characters is always a boy,
Yeah.
little boy going out to adventure. Even songs. So Bingo and Bingo was
His name.
who decided
Yeah.
bingo? So I decided, okay, to 5-year-old girl, daughter, she was saying Bingo and bingo was his name. Well, how do you know bingo is a boy
Yeah.
or a girl
Yeah.
or anything? She's like, well, that's how we sing it. Like,
Yeah.
you need to question.
Yeah.
So now my daughter says bingo was her name.
Okay.
Oh, she's only 5, so we'll move to they, but age appropriately. But for little girls, for little, they're always surrounded by such kind of male-centered
Yeah.
world. So I don't want at least my children to think they're the sort of the second to the boys. So we're equal. And I think young parents and my generation, and also my generation and young parents, I think they're making more conscious effort about that. And also, I think media is representing more gay dads or lesbian moms, more diverse families, step families. And our children's generation think that's normal.
Yeah.
Because they are surrounded by this. So by seeing in the mainstream media, in the movies, or we need to sort of normalize the marginalized group of people.
And the only way we can do that is with some level of intentionality.
Exactly.
To go back to what Sydney was
Exactly.
Talking about including now the
Yes.
audience,
It's time, yeah.
it's definitely time to go to the questions. And Mike, I hope you have loads of questions in the chat for us. So please fire them at us. We're looking forward to them.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Yes, the chat is on fire, and it's been really great. Thank you, everybody in the chat. By upvotes, the top question is a collaboration between Graham and Siona, and they are talking about quote unquote, I have been in workplace sessions where the privileged majority, i.e. straight white men, switch off. How do you think we can better engage the majority in the realities of intersectionality, which they believe impact us all, and if used well, can be a call to personal action?
Caroline, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important way that I can probably bring that effort forward is to keep encouraging people to tell stories, to keep giving people a platform where they can talk about their own lived experience. I am still shocked often when I hear of some of the microaggressions that my colleagues face on a daily basis. And I shouldn't have to need that shock to remember to keep doing something about this. But I hear too often, this is not my problem. I don't know how to get involved. A win for someone else means a lose for me. We've got to stop talking about it in those kind of terms. And I think one of the most important ways to do that is to keep on having this conversation together. And we can really only do that if leaders are really truly invested in the conversation. They're not just doing it for lip service, but they really mean it.
Yeah.
I hope that goes some way to answer the question. Maybe Sebenzile, you can add
please.
into that one.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. How do you make it something or an issue that folks care about, right? And usually when there's a cost to not caring about something, people sit up and listen. So that's the stick approach. When there's a reward for people caring about an issue, people will also sit up and listen. So I think you can try multiple approaches. Quotas are usually seen as punitive as the stick approach, but I think that's just forcing organizations, for example, to say, look, in your leadership, you don't have this particular grouping or this particular demographic, and there ought to be some sort of cost to that. So one of our grantees, it's the South African Management Forum. They run the South African Workplace Equality Index, and essentially organizations voluntarily participate in this, and it's competitive in the sense that you want to score high, as I suppose people do with all sorts of indices, right? You want to see how you rate yourself. You're putting up a mirror to yourself. You're saying we're doing well here, we're not doing well here. This is where we can improve, and these are the steps that we're taking to actually get to that particular point. So if you are able to measure it, and I don't know from the question if the white straight men switching off, if that it can be measured in some way, and I think it can be quantified, I think in some form. But if you are able to measure that, figure out a plan on how to shift that, and then measure it at a particular point in time, I think that is very helpful and positive for the organization. I like the carrot approach, but I'm very happy to pull out the stick approach as well when people are just not prepared to actually do what's right, and just continue to pay lip service to things, but actually say there's a cost to this if you don't, that as an organization would take it seriously. And so if people don't participate, that there's a real cost to it. But I'd rather start with the reward side of things, where people recognize the benefit across the board. If it is competitive, if there is an index that corporations can sign up to, or studies or research or whatever it is that they can participate in, and be able to pat themselves on the back at the end of the process to say, we did this, and this is how the organization is changing. But in cases where there isn't any of that, what's the stick approach that works in that regard? I think in different parts of the world it's different, right? Quotas and so on. But I think that there are definitely many ways to approach it. But it is a huge frustration that we've seen here as well, where folks are there, they're looking at their watches, waiting for all of this to end, and then they go on about their business, and that's not good enough. And I think that's where leadership comes to the party to say, how do you ensure that people that are actually present, that they're intentional, that they're doing the hard work, and they're not just here, and it's not just a box ticking exercise.
And I think there's actually a very good reason to it as well. If you look at the sustainability of an organization, specifically the sustainability of a business, if you want to attract millennials, if you want to attract financiers, actually, you've got the ESG, environmental social governance principles. And actually, this is the reason why you should act inclusive, actually, as an organization. And especially, I would say, for your future, you want good millennials to join your firm, and they are definitely looking at these things. Mike, there's lots more in the chat box, I think.
Very much so. The next most upvoted question comes from Workplace Pride's own Christine, and she asks, what are the best places within the workplace to organize intersectional discussions? And who, in terms of position in the organization, should definitely be involved?
I think, Yuli, you can answer that, I think.
I think people who have more influence in the sort of the culture in the workplace. So in that sense, probably the top management, leadership, also line managers. It's important for line managers, especially who's in the hiring position. For example, you mentioned the younger generations, Gen Z, who are born after 1995. They're super inclusive, regardless of their gender, because that's how they grew up. So if you want to hire the right talent who will contribute to the positive workplace culture in your organization, then you have to have your culture inclusive for them already. So check out the job description that you put out there, which platform that you're using, what kind of language that it's used. Do you use more male traits, adjectives in your job description, and you will turn off the more female candidates, etc. So I would say line managers, management, who have more influence on creating the culture.
And the HR would add.
And HR as well.
What tends to happen in reality is that you find, Sebazila, you've talked about this a number of times, you tend to find that it's the affinity groups, it's the employer resource groups who kind of get lumped with the let's sort the diversity problem for this organization. And that is, and also in response to the first question, that doesn't respond to people who hold power in organizations. So I completely agree with you. You need to kind of build this into the power structure, basically. Otherwise, it's always going to be another diversity issue.
I think remuneration of the leadership, actually, this should be included in that as well.
In KPIs, absolutely. And it's possible to do. You hear a lot about, this is not possible to do. It's absolutely possible to give leadership inclusion goals in the way that they're assessed.
Yeah, wonderful. Mike, fire the next question, please.
All right. The next question, most popular voted, is every country has a history of using racist expressions. Some people still use them nowadays at work and think nothing of it. How do we make people aware of this if they can't see for themselves how truly horrible these expressions actually are? And how would intersectionality help with this?
Seventil, would you like to take this question, please?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I recognize that we all come to consciousness and awareness, self-awareness in particular, at different points. But I think sometimes you can, sometimes you can kind of tell if somebody is playing dumb or not, because I think people do that as well, and say, "Oh, I don't know, I'm offending you," by saying something. And I think in cases like that, I hope the BS can be called out, because there's a lot of that happens, and then the people who have been harmed by what has been said and now, after being harmed, must now do the intellectual work of supporting this person. It's not fair. It's too much, and in cases where people who are bright, right, they can explain to you all sorts of concepts, all sorts of high level things, but play dumb when it comes to issues of identity. I struggle with that quite a bit, and I have very limited patience for those people. And one hopes that within the organization, that there are structures in place to then deal with that, to say, hey, Mike said this at the coffee station. And then there's a way to then deal with all of that. But for people who don't know, I think this is why our organizations are important, and why we exist, and why we do the work that we do, is to recognize that the language is not necessarily very familiar for everybody. People are only learning about the acronym now, and it keeps growing. And in countries, in parts of the world like ours, where many of us are not first language English speakers, there's also there's another challenge to that as well, where you have to understand what the dynamics of a particular context are, and so be then okay with, as much as it can feel like a lot sometimes, that you're always teaching or doing the work, that you then be okay to go the extra mile, because you recognize that the person is coming from a place of ignorance. They're not coming from a place of malice, or just looking to offend the next person. But I think the organization can support that, right? So if they could, whether you're sponsoring people to attend train sensitivity workshops, whether you're bringing in LGBTI groups to come in and do all sorts of trainings, or buying resources for the organizations. I think the organization should go that far to support people. But when you are able to discern what you're dealing with, somebody who's being deliberately offensive or somebody who actually doesn't know, I think you then choose how you approach each case based on that. But you have a lot of people who know that they shouldn't be saying what they're saying, but they do it anyway because they know they can get away with it. And that's where it's important that the organization is set up to be able to deal with that, so people aren't either discouraged and just up and leave at the first opportunity, or are kind of going into work and they're going in to be abused all the time. That's the last thing we want, right? And that happens. And so I think it's on the organization, it's on the individuals to figure out how do we get each other on the same page, because we don't all start off on the same page.
And this is also where when in the beginning I said this is where we need to start the sometimes uncomfortable conversations. So without addressing it will never be solved. So we have to start addressing this, and sometimes just stay close to your feelings, I would say. But we have to start these uncomfortable conversations.
Well, and I think we also have to possibly stop shying around the role of the bystander as well. And that's really, really important. If someone says something to Yuli and I can see that you're visibly hurt, why should I leave it up to you to sort that out?
Exactly.
That's the time when I need to act. And it's often the choice, okay, am I going to act now or am I going to act later? But whatever I do, I have to do something. I have to act. I have to support you in some way. That's basic human
Wonderful.
decency.
Thanks. Wonderful, sir. Thanks. Mike, maybe two more questions if we
think-
short answer.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think we have time for just one more question before
Okay,
your closing
good.
words. Megan asks, what advice do you have for starting the conversation of intersectionality and LGBTQIA plus issues in the workplace or space that is not very LGBTIQ plus friendly?
Wow.
Some very simple advice, maybe just to close out.
This is where we start getting
Yeah, well,
uncomfortable.
what do you think LGBTIQ plus sort of hostile organizational culture? Where do we start?
Chip in, ladies, if there's anybody
Yeah,
else helping
let me
out. This is
think,
really a difficult one. I guess.
Did Megan mention the industry or because I don't believe the entire organization or the old employees are against LGBTIQ plus people. They're always, well, we are everywhere, like I said, and also allies as well. Even though you may think it's quite a hostile culture in your department, maybe, or team or department or even the organizations, but I think it's good to start connect with the employee resource groups to if you're scared to start on your own, then maybe the gender group, the female group, can be a good start.
Idea, actually. Yeah, that's
and
not a bad
within
idea.
the female, like a women in business
Yeah.
group, there might be people who have the same-sex partners
Yeah.
or things like that. And
Yeah.
then the power will become not just LGBTIQ plus people, because we're just kind of very small fraction of the entire population. So then women, and we become stronger together, stronger, and then we can start talking about gender. We can start stretching out more of the uncomfortable conversation that the majority might feel. But I think it's good to start with networking with the allies, and then start the conversation, maybe small scale, and then bring it to the wider scale, if that works.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's for me. It sounds like a very, very, very good route indeed to take. Maybe short last words of our speakers. Really, really short. Sibenzil, start with you, but please, a short last remark which you want to give the audience a takeaway.
Thank you once again for the opportunity. I think just being able to participate in this discussion today has been a great privilege. Allow me to take the opportunity to just invite folks to visit theotherfoundation.org to understand a bit more the work that we do. I think importantly, it's to always remember that this is a journey. We all start somewhere. It's not going to end tomorrow. We're not all going to reach this point of enlightenment, in the next 5 minutes. It's a journey. It will be great if we're all just patient through it, but also recognize how important it is. It's not just a nice to have. We're talking about human beings, and when we're able to be ourselves in our fullness, in our wholeness, in our totality, I think the world is a better place for it. But be intentional, be deliberate, understand that the root of the hate that comes with hating this group of people is also facilitated by structure, right? So in order to undo that, you also require structure to undo the effects of that. Thank you once again. It's been a privilege.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. It was a pleasure having you here. Caroline, just
I mean, to echo what Sibenzil said, address the structures, keep on having the conversations, really try and work to bring in as many voices as you can. I think that's something that we can all do.
perfect. Thanks. Yuli.
I think first step is to acknowledge that discrimination and harassment is taking place, unfortunately, as of today. And LGBTIQ plus people's rights and the workplace experiences has gotten so much better in the last, I would say, 20 years. It's much better, but discrimination is still happening. So be mindful about that. And like you said, start listening the voices that marginalized from the small group of people in the workplace, because they matter.
Wonderful. It was a pleasure having you here today with us. And maybe to remind you, this webinar is being recorded, so you can anytime watch it again on our website, Workplace Pride website, and probably also a link through Catalyst. So feel free to do it again. And one last message I want to give you, which is there is a LGBTIQ plus inclusion in the workplace session happening in Hungary. It's on the 17th of May. It will be a webinar, so it will be online. It's co-organized by Workplace Pride, hosted by the Dutch Embassy in Budapest. And if you want to be there on the 17th of May, go to the Workplace Pride website, and there you'll find the link. I once again would like to thank all panelists online and here in the studio with me, the guys supporting us superbly today. And thank you all for being here present on the webinar, talking about this very timely and important issue on intersectionality. I hope you've enjoyed it, you've learned from it, and thank you for being here, and stay healthy, stay safe.